Have you ever heard about winning something, but the cost is so high it takes you 61 years to pay it off? Well, today we're diving into the absolutely wild story of a massive debt from World War II. But this isn't about the loser paying up. No, this is about the winner, Great Britain, and a bill that stretched across 3 entire generations.
So, our story really kicks off at the very end. It's the last working day of 2006, and deep inside the British Treasury, someone hits a button and a final payment gets zapped across the Atlantic. Just like that, a chapter of history that started in the rubble of 1945 finally and very quietly came to a close.
And look, this wasn't some forgotten, symbolic dollar. The final chunk of change paid to the United States was over $83 million. It was the very last drop in a bucket that had been slowly, painstakingly filled for over 6 decades, a direct financial link between our modern world and the darkest days of the 20th century.
Now here's where the story gets really strange. You have Britain, the nation that fought from day one, saddled with this loan that took 61 years to repay. And then you have Germany, the aggressor, which got billions in grants, actual gifts through the Marshall Plan, and then had half of its remaining debt just wiped clean in 1953. No repayment necessary.
So what is going on here? How on earth did the winner get a 61-year bill with interest, while the loser was basically handed the cash to build an economic miracle? To figure this out, we've got to rewind the clock, all the way back to the moment the war ended.
The year is 1945. The war is over. But for Britain, the fight for survival was just getting started. Only this time, it was a financial war.
You know, you see the pictures of people celebrating in the streets, and it looks like pure joy. But behind all those smiles was a nation completely on its knees. 6 years of total war had just shattered its cities, drained its bank accounts, and pushed its economy to the absolute brink. Britain had literally spent everything it had to win.
And then, the hammer dropped. Just days after Japan surrendered, President Truman in the U.S. just stopped the Lend-Lease program. Now, this was the American lifeline that had kept Britain fed and armed since 1941, and it was turned off overnight. No warning, no heads up. Ships that were already halfway across the ocean suddenly had a bill attached. In an instant, Britain was bankrupt. And you better believe the panic inside the government was real. The UK's finance minister, Hugh Dalton, called the situation an almost desperate plight. Without cash, Britain couldn't buy food to feed its people or get the raw materials to rebuild. The country was just months away from total collapse.
So Britain sent its star economist, the famous John Maynard Keynes, to Washington. He was supposed to secure a grant, a gift really, as a thank you for Britain's sacrifice. But what he came back with was something very, very different. He came back with a loan, and it had a hidden trap.
Okay, so here's what the Americans put on the table. A loan package of about $4.3 billion. The interest rate, 2%. Seemed pretty low. But then there was the catch, the real poison pill. Britain had to promise to make its currency, the pound, freely exchangeable for US dollars within 1 year. Keynes knew this could be a catastrophe, but with his country staring into the abyss, what choice did he have? He had to say yes. And here it is, the actual document, signed in December 1945. On one hand, it was the lifeline that saved Britain from going under immediately. But written into the fine print were the terms that would basically end its financial empire.
So, what exactly was this sterling convertibility trap? Well, think of it this way. Countries like India had sold Britain tons of stuff during the war, and they got paid in pounds. But they couldn't spend them yet, so they were just sitting on mountains of British money. Convertibility was a promise that, on one specific day, all of them could show up at the Bank of England and swap those pounds for precious US dollars. It was setting the stage for a bank run, but on an entire country.
And the nightmare that Keynes worried about, it came true and fast. The second convertibility started on July 15, 1947. A global stampede to cash out began. In just 37 days, nearly $1 billion, a massive piece of that American loan, was sucked right out of Britain's reserves. The government slammed on the brakes and stopped it, but it was too late. The damage was done. The loan that was meant for rebuilding was gone, and nobody trusted the British pound anymore.
So, that 37-day crisis? Yeah. The ripple effects were huge, and they would fundamentally change Britain's place in the world forever.
2 years later, bam, the inevitable happened. Britain was forced to devalue the pound by a jaw-dropping 30%. In a single day, every person's savings in Britain was worth less, and the price of everything they needed to import from overseas just shot through the roof. So those conditions in the American loan, they directly caused a crisis that killed any chance of a quick British recovery. But even more importantly, it was the beginning of the end for the pound as the world's go-to currency. It basically cleared the stage for the US dollar to take over.
Which brings us right back to that crazy question we started with. Because while Britain was getting crushed by this loan, its old enemy was getting a totally different kind of deal.
I mean, the numbers just speak for themselves. Britain got a $4.3 billion loan and paid every penny back plus interest. Germany, on the other hand, got $1.4 billion in Marshall Plan aid as a grant, a gift. Then, in '53, the London Accords just forgave half of Germany's remaining debts. It's simple. One nation got a bill, the other got a bailout.
So why the completely different treatment? Well, it all came down to one thing, the Cold War. By 1948, the new enemy wasn't Germany, it was the Soviet Union, and a weak, broken Germany was seen as a prime target for communism. America needed a strong, capitalist West Germany as an ally and a buffer. Suddenly, rebuilding their former enemy was a top priority.
And you can see the results of these two different paths so clearly. Britain, the ally, was weighed down by debt for decades. West Germany, the former enemy, was freed from its financial chains and went on to have its famous economic miracle.
But, this whole story wasn't just about two countries. The way this loan played out ended up reshaping the entire global financial system for the rest of the century.
That loan was like a shadow hanging over the British economy for decades. The deal actually allowed them to skip payments in a crisis, and Britain had to do it 6 times. And each time they did, it lines up perfectly with a moment of national crisis. The Suez Canal crisis, currency meltdowns, even a bailout from the IMF in 1976. The debt was always there, a constant reminder of how fragile things were.
In the end, you could say the loan worked exactly as the American negotiators had hoped. It kept Britain from sinking, but it also kept it weak. By draining Britain's dollar reserves and breaking its old trading system, it sped up the transfer of global financial power from London to Washington, from the pound to the dollar. The transfer of an empire wasn't won on a battlefield. It was negotiated in a government office.
Britain did pay back every last cent. They honored the deal. But the story of this 61-year debt leaves us with the pretty provocative question, one that's still incredibly relevant today. How often is debt a weapon, just disguised as help?